We're having folks come in one by one. We will get started in just 1 minute. Well, as people continue to join us, hello, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Reba Elliott, and I am the Executive Director of Great Old Broads for Wilderness. We are the only national conservation movement of older women. We're protecting America's public lands together, and we're so happy that you're with us here today. Thank you for spending your time with us. This event is part of our monthly event series, and today we have a really, really wonderful, wonderful guest with us that we're just absolutely delighted about. Our friend Walt Dabney is here. Walt is a 43-year veteran of the National Park Service and of Texas Parks and Wildlife. Has wonderful short stories to share and a great perspective. Walt will be sharing a presentation today, actually a documentary that was made of some of his work. And after Walt speaks, we'll have the chance to ask him questions. So if you wouldn't mind to put into the chat right now, maybe your first name and where you're coming from. We always love to get to know each other a little bit like that. So if you'd like to just drop in your first name and where you're zooming in from, that would be great. And as Walt's presentation goes on, if you would like to share any questions you have for him, don't feel like you have to wait till the end. If something comes up for you, just stick it right in that chat there. And as soon as we finish watching Walt's movie, we will answer as many of those questions as possible. So get your typing fingers ready, get ready to ask Walt questions. This is a great opportunity to connect with someone who has so much experience. So I will now pass it over to Walt.
Good morning, all. It's great to be with you early this morning. We got rain in Buena Vista, Colorado last night. That's where I am, and we need it really bad. Had the worst winter that anybody knows of for a very long time. Anyway, this is going to be good for the fires, and we've been burning up badly out here. I'm I started this journey about 9 years ago in 2017 when I was in Moab, Utah, coming back from Texas, where I retired as director of state parks down there. And I came back west because Texas, as I tell you in the documentary, Texas really has very little public land, which is true of a lot of states other than the 11 western states. And I'm a very active, still as an old guy, a very active public land user. I wanted to get back out here where I didn't have to go very far to be able to do that kind of thing. And I got back out here and I hear people saying all kinds of crazy things that I didn't think were true. And I start about public lands, and I started looking into it and found out it wasn't true, and started compiling a PowerPoint so that I could talk to people about what is actually true about their public lands, and ended up putting it together. And the League of Women Voters in Southeast Utah asked me if I would do this at the Moab Library, and we had a packed house. And people said, "You got to take this on the road. Most of us don't know this, and we need to know this." And so for 7 years, I was on the road, probably in 14 states, maybe 15 now, doing this in-person presentation. The documentary that we're gonna watch here in just a minute, because it's much more effective now with the better illustrations. The documentary came about because the Canyonlands Natural History Association, that I'd done a number of programs for, said, you can't be everywhere. We need to get this out to other people. So they paid to have this put in a professional documentary format. And now what I do is introduce it like I'm doing right now, and then we watch that, and then we have the question and answer thing. The whole purpose of this is to educate people about their public land. Uh, I don't do this as a business in any way. Anything in this program or on my website, which Great Old Broads will share with you at the end of this, is yours to use and share and give your own programs and so forth. Nothing is copyrighted. A lot of the discussion in here uh, uses Utah as an example, and that's not all bad because Utah, unfortunately, has been the epicenter for serious efforts to try to get these lands away from us. That's going on today as we speak, and the Grand Staircase Escalante and Bears Ears are great examples of that threat and that reality, actually. And so the information that I share with you in Utah is available in every other state, and it's pretty darn easy to find. And in the case of Colorado, I've got a bunch of that information that if you're interested at the end of this program, I can share some of the same information in Colorado and a number of the other western states that I have for Utah. So with that, I'd ask Rachel to go ahead and start that. And again, I look forward to your questions. That's always a lot of fun. And I'm good with anything you want to talk about. If I don't know the answer, I won't make something up, but I'll get back to you with what it is, or we'll figure out how to find it together. Thanks again for being here, and I look forward to the discussion afterwards.
I am Walt Dabney. It's great to be with you here again today, and it's always a pleasure. I was superintendent here in the 90s. I grew up in Texas, a long way from here. My granddad had a ranch when I was a kid. I did my outdoor activities at the ranch. I didn't realize in Texas in those days that not everybody had one, and so I didn't really grow up using parks or the public lands. I've subsequently found out that's largely because there aren't any in Texas, and ended up going to Texas A&M University and got a degree in recreation and park management in 1970 and spent the next 30 years working for the National Park Service. In 1969, when I was still in school, I got a Western Union telegram. Think of this, a Western Union telegram offering me a GS5 park naturalist at Old Faithful. I went, well, hell, I've never been there. That sounds like a fun time. So I loaded up my 60 Falcon Ranchero and headed west from Texas, slept in the back in a roadside park and rolled in there. They showed me how to put my uniform on, and by the end of that summer, I went, you've got to be kidding me. I could do this for a living and get paid for it, and I did for the next 30 years. I was a ranger in Yosemite and then a district ranger at Paradise at Mount Rainier, and then a district ranger for the South District in the Grand Tetons, and then the chief of resource management in Everglades, having said a real ranger never would go east of the Mississippi River. And there I was. And then the next thing I did was another thing I said I'd never do, is work in Washington, D.C. And I did that for 5.5 years as chief ranger for the National Park Service. And among my duties there, in 1988, when I was there, Yellowstone caught on fire, and I had the Park Service fire program. So I spent a lot of time trying to explain in 4 or 5 minute sound bites on television what was going on in Yellowstone and why we couldn't put it out and why it may not be as bad as they think. And I'm not sure I was very successful, but Yellowstone fire went out, and I got the opportunity to come out here for the superintendent in Canyonlands, Arches, Natural Bridges, and Hoven Week. I did another thing I said I'd never do, and that's leave Moab. And my home state said, would you come down here and help us with Texas State Parks? So I did that for 11.5 years and then retired in Austin, Texas. I'm originally from there, as I said, and pretty quickly realized the ranch is gone. It is no more. Except for the state parks, this state that is the second most populous in the nation and the second biggest geographically in the nation has very limited public land available for recreation. So we wanted to come back west, and we wanted to come back to Moab. So we did that about 9 years ago. And so I'm going to tell that story a little bit, and I'm going to tell you that the reason I'm doing this talk today, and the reason we're filming it today, and the reason that I feel so passionate about it, I'm on the road sort of like a traveling preacher, is that when I got back out here, I hear people saying, man, these lands are locked up, or the Constitution does not say that the federal government can own land. At statehood, we were promised to get our land back. And I'm sitting there thinking, man, I've only done this 43 years, but I didn't know any of that kind of stuff. I think I'm going to start looking into it. And so what you're going to see the rest of the afternoon are the kind of things that I found out to be true. My goal in this whole thing is everything that's in this program is absolutely accurate. And in 7 years of doing it, I've never had anybody share with me, which I invite you to do because I want to get it right, share with me that anything was inaccurate or wrong, either factually or historically. I want it to be absolutely right on. The only thing in here to me that is political, and I don't go into any of the issues with my spin on it, the only thing I see in here that is political is I am absolutely rabid about the fact that it would be unconscionable that we transfer these lands out of federal ownership, which means that we all own them. So let's get along with this, going into your public lands. And when I say the federal lands or public lands, that just means that you and I are both landowners, and these are ours. You recognize the United States, you recognize the shape of the states. This is what we look like today, but it didn't always look that way. In fact, when European man arrived on the East Coast, it wasn't an abandoned piece of land. There were a whole lot of people here, thousands and thousands of Native American people, hundreds of tribes, and my guess unequivocally is they were not sitting around hoping that Europeans would discover them. And the longer we've been here, I am absolutely certain the more sure they are of that fact. But that's not my story today. That's not what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about the first English colony arrived here in 1607 at Jamestown. By 1776, the colonists had decided they'd had enough of British rule, and they started the American Revolution. And it was not at all certain that we were going to prevail. In fact, we lost most of the battles we fought with Britain. But at the same time we were fighting, they were meeting in Philadelphia with a group of men who were trying to figure out, if we are successful, how are we going to run this operation, this new country? And so they were trying to design the Articles of Confederation. And one of the biggest sticking points, perhaps the sticking point, was that the states of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Connecticut, and Massachusetts, 6 out of the 13 colonies, claimed lands all the way to the Mississippi River. The other 7 said, that's a deal killer. Those belong to all of us, not just you, just because you claim them. So they negotiated that for a while, they argued about it for a while, and what they decided, number one, is that no state would exist until this document was signed, that these lands be considered as common property of the nation because they were wrested from the common enemy by the blood and treasure of the 13 states, meaning that all of us and from all these states died, were wounded, lost our homes, our treasures, everything else to win this. We all are going to own this. So that's what they did. And over the next few years, all these lands that became these states were ceded by the original 13 colonies all the way to the Mississippi River. So how'd we get the rest of it? Well, this is what we won from Britain. In the Treaty of Paris in 1783, France, England, the United States, and actually Spain signed this treaty. England ceded all of this country here So that was given back by the first 13 colonies became the first public lands that we all owned in common, or actually our ancestors owned at that time. The next big piece of it was the Louisiana Territory. We had access to the Mississippi River, but we had no way to get through the port of New Orleans because France owned and controlled that port. So Thomas Jefferson started talking to Napoleon Bonaparte, who was in the process of starting his third or fourth or fifth war in continental Europe. They fought for 100 years, I think. And he needed money. And he said, okay, instead of just talking about New Orleans, how about if I sell you the whole enchilada? And so I think the best real estate deal in American history happened when Thomas Jefferson, for $15 million, bought the entire Louisiana Purchase in 1803. The next one, we fought the War of 1812. We nearly got beat there again. We finally just quit fighting. In 1818, we threatened to go to war with Britain up here with this piece of land. Britain and the U.S. finally worked out an agreement with the British cession of 1818. We agreed nothing north of the 49th parallel would be American, and they agreed anything south of the 49th parallel in this area here would not be British. The next thing was Spain. We had, unfortunately, slaves escaping out of the colonies. Unfortunately, we had that period of our history. And Native Americans raiding into the colonies there. We told Spain, we're going to invade you if you don't fix this. Spain said, I'll tell you what, we owe you $5 million. How about we give it to you and we call the debt good? So for $5 million, we got East and West Florida and this piece of disjunct Spanish land. I'm not sure exactly what those were or why they were there. The next thing was my home state of Texas, 1836. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about Texas because people always ask me, don't you wish this was like Texas? And I said, no. No, I don't. If you're talking about the fact that there are no public lands in Texas, no, I don't. So anyway, Texas rebelled in 1836, fought the Mexican government, and won their independence. And for the next 9 years, Texas was not part of the United States. It was an independent country, the Republic of Texas. The next one was the United States invaded Mexico in 1846 at the Mexican War. At the same time, Americans were threatening to fight Britain again. I don't know why in the world, but we were going to fight Britain again. And you remember from your history the old term 54-40 or fight. 54-40. If they didn't cede us everything below the 54th parallel, we were going to go to war. Well, Polk said, I'm not fighting Mexico and England at the same time. They cut a deal with Britain that ceded this Northwest Territories, everything below, again, the 49th parallel, and everything above that went to Britain in the form of Canada. Anybody know where the 54th parallel is? It is actually the southern boundary of Alaska. So what we were doing is we're saying we claim everything all the way to Alaska, which was then Russia. So without going to war, we got that cession. We won the Mexican War. And Mexico recognized that this was Texas, and they also ceded in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, all this country, including those states that you see there, to the United States. So war. The next one was the Gadsden Purchase in 1853, and again we were threatening to go to war with Mexico because we were trying to build the southern link of the transcontinental railway through here, and we needed this land, so instead of going to war, we bought it from Mexico for $10 million. The next piece, probably the second best real estate purchase that we ever did, was buying Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million. 2 cents an acre. Pretty good deal. Russia wants it back. I don't think we're going to do that. And then the next one was Hawaii. Hawaii was a stable country. It had a queen. It was a peaceful country. Americans went down there to grow fruit and raise cattle and so forth, and decided this would be a nice thing for us to have, and I think we're in danger. So they asked the federal government to send in the Marines. They did. We actually just took over Hawaii and annexed it, and it became a territory. And the first governor of Hawaii was a guy named Dole. Anybody eat pineapple in here? Dole. The next was in the Spanish-American War when we got the island of Puerto Rico in winning the Spanish-American War. And the last piece of land was the American Virgin Islands, which we bought from Denmark in 1917, just as we went into World War I. So, war, treaty, purchase, that's how we got all of these lands which we owned in common. Remember that I was saying that we got this in 1848 at the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. One of the things people talk about is we want our lands back. What was this country when the Mormon pioneers came into the Salt Lake Valley? It was Mexico. I guess we were immigrants into Mexico at the time. Kind of interesting thought. Anyway, property clause. I was told that the Constitution does not in any way suggest that the federal government could own land. Simply not true. The property clause of the Constitution, Article 4, Section 3 says, the Congress shall have the power to dispose of and to make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States. And nothing in this Constitution shall be construed as to prejudice any claims of the United States. We can own property and we can own territory in common. The government did, and in fact they did after that war. So how did those lands that I just showed you we got all together, how did we start getting those into private hands? There are a lot of reasons. First of all, we had no money when we won our independence, so we paid our soldiers in land. If you were a private or enlisted man, you could get 100 acres of farmable land, up to 50 or 500 acres if you were a colonel or higher. We sold land for $1 an acre. So a section of land, 640 acres, would cost you $640. And you think in today's terms, what a steal. $1 in 1785 was a lot of money. And $640 was an absolute fortune. That raised to $1.25. And over the time this was being done, nearly 180 million acres of this land that I just showed you where we got was transferred to private ownership. Then came the Homestead Act in 1862 during the Civil War, and under the Homestead Act, you could claim 160 acres of land if you were the head of a household. And the head of a household could be a man or a woman. That was increased to 320 and then to 640 over time, and then even more after that. The reason for that being that the good lands got homesteaded first. All those lands in those days were used for agriculture. So the good lands, the ones near water, went first. It took more land as you got further away from water, and as you went west, the landscape became drier and drier as well. So it took more acreage. You had to be 21 years old. You had to live on the land for 5 years. You had to build a house on it, and then it was yours. And under that program, on top of the 180 million acres that was sold to people, another 270 million acres went to private ownership. That's starting to be real acreage now. Then we still didn't have enough money, so we needed to build the railroads, and we started paying to build the railroads in land. So as the railroads went west, 200 feet on either side of the track was deeded to the railroad as railroad land. In addition to that, for every mile of completed track in a checkerboard pattern, as much as 12,500 acres of land was transferred to the railroad, who then, of course, sold it to land speculators or private individuals. And under that program, on top of 180, 270, and another 180 million acres were now transferred to private ownership. Texas, interesting story. I didn't know this until I started putting this together, and I went to Texas history. This is what they were fighting over in 1836. That's what Texas was. And I didn't realize it, but that whole country, that whole economy was based on cotton. And when it was based on cotton, what did that mean? You had, in those days, unfortunately, you had slaves that were doing the work. And so the problem with that, and one of the reasons for the Texas Revolution, and if you look at the correspondence, Santa Anna was coming north out of Mexico because slavery was illegal in Mexico. And he was going to enforce it in Texas, that you cannot do that here. Mexico was defeated, and Texas became an independent country. This was all Texas, but Texas claimed this land all the way up into that panhandle there. And in fact, the top of that panhandle is about Rollins, Wyoming. One time was claimed by Texas. Subsequently, in 1850, they sold this to the United States for $10 million. Texas lands. Why does Texas not have any land? People ask me all the time. The same thing is true in virtually all the states other than the 11 western states. We're going to talk about that. Texas is 96% privately owned land. How did it get that way? When Texas won its independence, if you had a Spanish or Mexican land grant, that was a valid deed to that property. They also gave away land, a level 1 head grant in Texas, which my granddad's ranch was part of. His father bought it after the Civil War. He was a wounded Confederate soldier, came back there, bought that in 1883. And what was left of it was part of one of those original head grants from about 1840. And you could claim, if you were the head of a household in a level 1, up to 4,600 acres of land, which is a good piece of land, but it was all had to be farmable. Republic of Texas head grants, we paid the Revolutionary War soldiers in land. We built the railroads paying for them in land, and by 1900, there really wasn't any land left. What there was left went in the permanent school fund, and that's still the case today. It's used to generate money for schools. Most of you, or all of you in this room, recognize this fellow, another Civil War veteran, wounded at Shiloh, lost an arm, came down twice through the Colorado River, and those of you that have spent time on the river, those of us that have, the thought of launching in a wooden boat, going through that country with no idea what's around the next corner, it just continues to astound me. And they did it twice, and they had problems, obviously, but they did it twice. I'm not certainly focusing on that today, but John Wesley Powell, who you know was a surveyor, made his living surveying. By 1877 was the head of the U.S. Geologic Survey, and he went to the National Academy of Science meeting in 1877, and he made this statement: most of the land west of the 100th meridian cannot support conventional agriculture requiring at least 20 inches of annual rainfall or irrigation. And we know now, with what's happening with Lake Powell and Lake Mead, it is not sustainable what we're doing now. In no way is it sustainable, especially when you think of some of our practices, and I'm certainly not against agriculture, but when you're irrigating cotton and alfalfa in the desert, that is not sustainable. There's no way it can be. What is the 100th meridian? Runs up through about I-35 in Texas, all the way up through Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, through the Dakotas. What Wesley Powell was saying is all this country to the Sierra Nevadas cannot sustain conventional agriculture. Not enough rain. And if you think about it, those lands that were 160 acres, 240 and so forth, 320 and then 640, those lands were back east. As they came here, they weren't claiming those lands because you could not make a living. There was no water to do that. That was his idea about the aridity of that country then, and it is so true now. In 1785, Thomas Jefferson established the rectangular survey system for gridding the entire United States. It looks like this. Many of you know how that works. 6 miles square, a township, 36 square miles in each township. The entire country is gridded that way. Utah would look like this with that grid pattern in there. And if you see those blue dots in each of those yellow sections, those are the state sections that they got at statehood. What does that mean? At statehood, Utah received sections 2, 16, 32, and 36 in each one of those 36 square mile blocks. Not all states did. I don't know why the difference. Nevada got 2 sections per township. Colorado got 2. Wyoming got 2. Either somebody said it's because Utah's more dry. Utah's the second driest. Nevada's more dry than Utah, and it got 2 sections. So I don't know. Maybe Brigham was a better negotiator. Who knows? The state got right at 7.5 million acres at statehood. This was given to them out of that cache of federal lands that we all own. The state was carved out of those federal lands meaning lands we own in common. They have sold over 4 million of those acres since then, which I'm not arguing is a bad thing. That's what they were given it for. I'm just saying if it's state land, it's not necessarily public land. And it was given in the Statehood Act for these purposes. However you want to use it, it's used to do these things: public schools, universities, reservoirs, hospitals, and so forth. So that's what they're selling and using those lands to maximize the profits of. Utah Statehood Act. Remember I said, people said, they told us at statehood we were going to get our lands back. Well, first of all, they first got in here when it was Mexico. Then in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, it became United States territory. And the state of Utah was carved out of that territory, made a state in 1896. And the notion that they were assured at statehood that they would be given these lands after they were a state. The Statehood Act actually says these things: that the people inhabiting said proposed state do agree and declare that they forever disclaim all right and title to the unappropriated public lands lying within the boundary thereof. Not too unequivocal. It also says, the said state of Utah shall not be entitled to any further or other grant of land for any purpose than as expressly provided in this act. I don't see anything ambiguous about those statements. It's pretty clear that unless Congress changes their mind, that's what you get. Unfortunate thing occurred in 1901 with President of the United States. William McKinley was assassinated. That's always a tragedy. One of the things that came out of that is that we were absolutely lucky to have this guy as his vice president, who then took over the presidency. And what we know, enjoy, work on, and make our living on right now is largely attributable to this guy right here. One of his philosophies is this: it's not what we have that'll make us a great nation, it's what we do with it that'll make us a great nation. Absolutely true. This is how we were logging in those days. And we were absolutely had the potential to use up our entire forest system. These crews would come in here, cut everything down, snake the logs out, leave this, and move on to the next place. Then the grasses came in, because there was still some topsoil. Grasses came in where the trees had been. But then we introduced hundreds of thousands of livestock, mostly sheep, on this, which completely wiped out the grasslands. And then this sort of thing happened. This is Manti, Utah. This happened in many places throughout the West where there was no more watershed, and the mud and the snow and the rain just came down the mountain and wiped them out. People started screaming, we need some help. This is not going to work. And in 1891, Congress passed the Forest Reserve Act. And the Forest Reserve Act allowed the President of the United States out of that public domain to carve out what became national forests, but as forest reserves. It was signed into law by Benjamin Harrison, who set aside 13 million acres. Then came Grover Cleveland, who set aside another 25 million. And then McKinley was able to set aside 7 million before he was assassinated. And then came Teddy. And if you add all those figures up, the total acreage today in the National Forest System is about 193 million acres. Most of it is right there. Forest Service was established in 1905 to start taking care of these forest reserves. The first chief of the Forest Service was a guy named Gifford Pinchot. You want to read a good book, read The Big Burn. If you haven't read it, I seriously encourage you to do that. It tells the story of Pinchot. It tells the story of Pinchot and his relationship with Roosevelt, which was really fascinating. Pinchot's dad had made his money doing that logging picture at first. He'd clear cut. He was a robber baron. He was a timber baron. Gifford thought he was going to do that. His dad said, no, you're not. You're going to fix what I trashed. He sent him to France and Germany to silviculture school, forestry school. And they came back, got the Yale Forestry School going. Pinchot would have his students take topographic maps under the Forest Reserve Act, take topographic maps, draw in what should be a forest preserve or reserve, take it over to Teddy, and I think they put it on Teddy's desk, and then the two of them, both of them loved to box. And they would go down in the basement to the gym of the White House and beat the hell out of each other for an hour, and then come up there, probably didn't take a shower, just signed off a couple of more new forests and went on about their business. And to give you an idea of what that does, that was Teddy in 1906. That's Teddy in 1905. These are just samples. This is Teddy in 1908. All of these were set aside then, and if you know what you do, the LaSalle's, a lot of it's private land. I guarantee you by the time, much longer, it would have been all private land, and we wouldn't have had the access we do today. So the Forest Reserve Act really made a difference. Agricultural appropriations. Some of the states started getting upset with the use of this and said that the states that are up there, and if you look at it closely, one of them that's not there is Utah, because Utah supported this because of the flooding and, you know, Salt Lake Front, when you got hundreds of thousands of sheep up there and you wonder why your water is getting a little bitter, you have a clue about that. These states said, we're not going to sign the Agricultural Appropriation Act in 1907 if you don't put an end to this. So Roosevelt had till March the 7th of 1907 to sign it. So what did they do? They went back in the boxing ring. When they were through, they signed another 21 forest reserves, and he signed the bill which got him the Agricultural Appropriations Act, and what we have in the forest system today is what they had done by this point in time in 1907. Forest Service mission. It doesn't say use it all up today. It says use this in a way that meets the needs of present and future generations. Antiquities Act passed to take care of special historic and scientific interests. It's kind of interesting. It's been used by every president since it was passed, 18 or 19 presidents. All of these national parks now would not be in place if they had not been first established as national monuments, because in many places, not in all, but in many of these places, the locals opposed them. For example, Grand Canyon. Teddy walked out there like I am right now, hoping not to fall in either. And he said, there's nothing humans can do to make that a better picture. Nothing we can do to improve what you're seeing here right now. So he tried 3 different times to get a national park establishment. It was defeated by local opposition. And this is one of the newspapers that were probably not in support based on what they wrote in the paper. The national park idea represented a fiendish and diabolical scheme, and whoever fathered such an idea must have been suckled by a sow and raised by an idiot. That is not a pro-park position. So Teddy signed off on it as a national monument in 1908. You ought to ask Arizona if they'd like to get rid of it now. It's worth millions of dollars a day to the state of Arizona. Teddy's legacy: set aside over 230 million acres of land, 100 national forests, 51 fish and wildlife sanctuaries, reservations, 5 national parks, 18 national monuments. Well, people started coming back, trappers from the West, and talking about these lands that were smoking and belching fire and these animals that were just unbelievably beautiful and prolific. Folks got to thinking, man, these guys have been out there way too long by themselves. So they sent an expedition, the Hayden expedition in 1871, out to look at Yellowstone, to evaluate it. And on that trip was a guy named William Henry Jackson, who had been a Civil War photographer, who took a picture of Old Faithful in 1871. It's an amazing photograph for those of you that are into photography. Also on that trip was a guy named Thomas Moran, who's one of our great painters, who painted the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. And they got back, and the expedition gave its report, and it was clear, hey, there's something out there. And so in March of 1872, President Grant signed the National Park Act that established Yellowstone National Park is really the first national park in the world. The first time a piece of land like that was set aside, not for royalty, not for nobility, not for wealthy people, but for everybody. Yellowstone, again, opposed by locals. It said, this is going to be the end of Bozeman, Montana. Have you tried to find a parking place in Bozeman, Montana? Yeah, you can't do it. They said the same thing about Grand Tetons, that Jackson, Wyoming, when it was set aside as a monument, Grand Tetons, Jackson, Wyoming will become a ghost town. Have you been to the ghost town of Jackson? That wasn't very good forecasting. The argument was nobody will ever get there, and I think it's 4.5 to 5 million get there every year now, which is worth huge amounts of money to that part of the world. And the delegation worked so hard to keep it from being funded that they finally had to send the Army in there, and the Army was in Yellowstone for 32 years, leaving in about 1918. And if you know Yellowstone, Mammoth Hot Springs was Fort Yellowstone. The rock houses up there were the officers' quarters in Yellowstone. So Yellowstone, they kept the poachers out and did all that with the Army before the Park Service was established. One of the things about the establishment of Yellowstone to me is it is indicative of how we had a good idea, but we didn't do it right from the start. What am I talking about that? Take these two animals right here, the bison and the elk. Can you say, Yellowstone's 2 million acres? And they said, that's 2 million acres locked up. If you look at this, the greater Yellowstone ecosystem is in the red. Yellowstone Act says that you will maintain this place, and I'm paraphrasing it, you will maintain this place in its natural condition, and wildlife in their natural condition. This 2 million acres Yellowstone is 8,000 feet. In the winter, it is completely buried in snow. It's well below zero. That was the summer range for those two animals I pointed out, bison and elk. And when it started to be winter, those animals came down through here. These are 6 national forests now in the green. Came down through here. And if you've been to Jackson Hole and you look at the National Elk Refuge there, and that big fence that goes across, that's not fencing those animals in. That's fencing them out of downtown Jackson, Wyoming, where they used to migrate through in the winter. So if we were going to do anything now, we need to make sure we manage what there is. All the white country is privately owned land now, and manage this in a way that is supportive of our ideas for Yellowstone National Park. Another one that I dealt with a whole lot when I was here as superintendent, when they first started talking about the establishment of Canyonlands, Senator Frank Moss and the Park Service proposed a 1 million acre erosion basin park. The other side, Senator Wallace Bennett, wanted 35,000 acres in the park in 3 pieces: the confluence, Needles, and Island in the Sky. So over a number of years, they argued it down to where when it was finally passed, this is what was actually passed. Later, the Mays District was added. And the total of that was 257,000 acres. I think it's 334 now. They didn't put Glen Canyon in because it has a little tar sand in it. And so instead of making it what it should have been, which over time is a gold mine, if you don't screw it up, you can figuratively mine it forever. I don't know how many times I've stood out on this Grandview Point in my flat hat and uniform and have visitors, which I just love, come to you like filings to a magnet. And we'd talk for 2 hours and they'd say, where's the park here? And they'd invariably say, well, if you step one more step over there, you're in the bowl quickly. And it goes all the way around here. And they say, well, I assume it's that big bowl. But it's not. That's what they finally argued it down to. And it makes, from a management standpoint, absolutely 0 sense. And if you did anything right here that would compromise that, it would be an absolute tragedy. Wallace Bennett said unequivocally that if you do this Canyonlands Park, this is what's going to happen to where we are now. It'll be the end of everything. All commercial use and business activity would be forever banned, and nearly all of southern Utah's growth would be forever stunted. Well, the reality is that outdoor recreation in Utah is worth about $6.1 billion a year in economic output. That's goods and services associated with this. In the United States, it's $862 billion, and in Utah, that's about 67,000 jobs that are affected with it. And these aren't my figures. These are from the U.S. Department of Commerce, Bureau of Economic Analysis in 2022. All these things you can check yourself. Park Service was established because by 1916, the Department of Agriculture and the Army were running different units of the National Park Service. They decided to combine them under one agency. A little different mandate in that you're going to provide for the use and enjoyment today of those areas in a way that leaves them unimpaired for the future. And in that park system, I think we now have about 500 units in the National Park System. The best of our prehistoric and historic resources, the places that make us who we are as Americans, and those special natural places, whether it's Yosemite or Yellowstone or the Grand Canyon or the Redwoods, which I think are unique in the world and that we hold in trust, in essence, for the world. BLM, established in 1946, took the General Land Office and the Grazing Service and combined them. Harry Truman established it. It manages all the lands that have not been designated as national parks, forests, refuges, military reservations, whatever it is, all those lands. It also manages about 250 million acres of land still. And it also manages all oil and gas and minerals management on the Forest Service and BLM lands. Their mission, like the Forest Service, is to use it wisely today and save it for future generations as well. This is a terribly important law that was passed in 1976, changed a lot of things. There had been a constant transfer of public land into private ownership. In 1976, the Federal Land Policy Management Act was passed, and it ended the Homestead Act, although there had been very little homesteading since about 1935 when the Taylor Grazing Act was passed. It said, Congress, the public lands will be retained in federal ownership unless as a result of a land use planning procedure provided for in the act, it is determined that disposal of a particular parcel will serve the national interest. Congress can always dispose of lands, but there's no more goal to get rid of those lands. In fact, the contrary is true now. So what are the lands we have left? About 28% of the United States is still in common ownership. We all own it. The yellow is BLM, the light green is Forest Service, the chartreuse kind of color right there are national park areas. The red are Native American reservations, which are not public land. The blue are military reservations and so forth. These lands back here where you said that where there's not public land, those were cut over timberlands that then were bought up by the federal government and replanted in large measure by the CCC. They were completely destroyed lands. So, your public lands. One of the big criticisms that some of these people are thinking they want to move these lands out of federal ownership, they're saying, well, the federal government isn't making a good return on these lands. They're not running this like a business. Having worked in federal and state government for many years, you can only do what the legislative body allows you to do. So let's look at multiple use a little bit. Timber. Timber is generally a bid process. If you're going to do a timber sale, you go out and look at this sale, and then you put it out in the market, and timber companies will bid on that. That's pretty straightforward. Oil and gas, however, for 95 years, the royalty rate for oil and gas on federal lands was 12.5. Same with coal. This administration just raised it to about what the state is doing here in Utah, for example, at 16.67. That's going to increase the royalty coming into the federal government, which is also a benefit to the state, which I'll share with you in a second. Hard rock minerals, this is the one that just absolutely floors me. Anybody can go out, whether they're American or a Canadian or an Australian or an Argentinian, and if they establish positions on public land and they start mining, they get approval to mine, the federal government gets nothing for that. No royalty whatsoever. That was established in 1872, so that's 150 years old. We need to look at that, because in the case of hard rock minerals, the state of Utah, and I don't know whether that's the right number or not, gets a 4% royalty for metalliferous minerals. Gold, copper, iron, zinc, any of those kind of things. For fissionable minerals like uranium, it's an 8% royalty. So we ought to at least index it to what the state charges. Recreation. I tell you, I use public lands all the time. I mountain bike, I hike, fish, hunt, river run. I don't do much horse stuff, but all those, and I never pay a thing. Never pay a thing. And I would be glad, I'm not speaking for you guys, I would be glad to buy an annual pass to the public lands if that money went back in to putting people on the ground out there to help run these places. Right now, it's free. Like, other than in a developed campground, it's free. And you say, well, I pay my taxes. So do the people in New York who will never, ever be here to use them in many cases. Fish and wildlife, I can buy an elk tag if I'm lucky enough to draw an elk tag and go hunt. I never pay a thing to go hunting. Try that in Texas or any other states that have little publicly accessible land. Scientific and historic. And here's a good one to talk about. And on all these issues, I will not take a philosophical or political stand on them. I just want you to know the information. But in the case of grazing, for example, and all these are from the USDA, Department of Agriculture, if you're going to put your stock on private land, non-irrigated pasture land, the average cost to you to put an AUM or an animal unit month, which is a cow, calf, a horse, 5 sheep, or 5 goats, as an example, it would cost you in Utah $16.50. If you're talking about the state costs and go down to Utah, if it's a single section of land, it's going to cost $5.82 an AUM. If it's a blocked up piece, like we're traded out of Canyonlands or something, it's $10.05. The federal rate, $1.35. Not arguing whether we ought to graze on public lands or not, but I'll just tell you, it would seem reasonable to me if we're talking about a piece of federal land and a piece of state land right next to each other, you ought to at least index it to what the state is charging in each individual state, and that would be fair. It'd be hard to argue, in my opinion. But that's grazing. Well, of all these receipts that come into the federal government, generally speaking, the state, in this case of Utah, gets half of those receipts. Half of the grazing receipts, half of the oil and gas royalty receipts. They would get half of the minerals or hard rock minerals receipts. They would get half of anything else that was raised in price. So in 2018, Utah got nearly $74.5 million of revenue sharing. In addition, PILT is a formula of acreage federal acreage in a county and the population, and the federal government pays in lieu of taxes that amount of money. So in total, Utah got $115 million in 2018 from the federal government for these lands in Utah. Well, outdoor recreation, which is something I feel really, really strongly about, and I want to talk about it a lot. These are not just stuff I like to do, they're stuff I know a lot of you like to do. This picture in many states would be almost impossible. Just getting access to that river across private lands is often not possible at all. If you jumped in the river at a highway bridge and are walking down the river like this, in many states you'd be trespassing now. You'd be either on the guy's land on the left or on the right because you're standing on the bottom. And so the public lands, you could go fish in so many places, and it's your land and you can go use it. Four-wheel drive. When I was in Texas, one of the programs I had was the grants program. We were constantly looking for places for four-wheel drive users who are legitimate users of the public land to find a place to go. And about the time we'd use motorized trail grant money coming from excise tax on gasoline, and we talked to some rancher about can they use your ranch roads for backcountry roads and so forth. And they say, how much are you going to pay me? We'd come up with an amount, and then his neighbors would find out that he was going to have four-wheel drive vehicles on his ranch. And every time the potential agreements fell through. That's why all these Texans and people from back east come out here to go do their interest and activity. Mountain biking is one of my passions. There are thousands of miles of trail on public lands available for riding. New trails are being built all the time. In states with little public land, it's a serious challenge to piece together any extensive trail network, as each piece of private land access has to be negotiated and is often not possible. Hunting. I've been a hunter since I was very young. To be able to hunt on private land in states with little public land is expensive. That's why you have so many hunters coming from the east, from non-public land states, out to the western states where the public lands exist, and they buy an out-of-state hunting and fishing license, and they basically then can hunt for free. And now, one of the groups I talked to recently was the backcountry hunters and anglers who understand this clearly, that if these lands go away, they got no place to go. River running, I dealt with this all the time. People launching their boats. In some places, they couldn't get out of the boat or they'd be trespassing. Others, if you're going to do a multi-day trip and you want to camp on the shore, and the definition of public land and private land is the mean high water, and you're not carrying a surveyor with you, then you're at the whim of that rancher who's saying, you're on my land, keep going. And so many differences here. All of you that are in the river running business, you know good and well that we've got it made. If you're a horse user and you want to do long rides or overnight pack trips, or if you're a backcountry hunter or fisherman that want to access your special spots on a horse, you've got to go to the public land states. If you're in a state that has no public lands and you're a horse user, your options are very limited, and probably you're going to spend a whole lot more time in a corral than you are doing the things you love to do. If you're a backpacker, there are literally thousands of miles of trails on public lands for you to hike, camp, explore, all over the United States. Most of these are on public lands. We have trails that go all the way from the Mexican border to Canada. We have them in the east that are largely in public lands, like the Appalachian Trail that runs through the Smokies and Shenandoah and Blue Ridge Parkway. We probably have the finest collection of trails for backcountry users anywhere in the entire world, right here in the United States. In 1969, when I was a park naturalist, I walked this boardwalk a couple of times a week on my roving interpretive patrol, looking for somebody to talk to. Now you just hope you don't get pushed into the thermal feature that you were going to talk about. This is a state park in Texas, Enchanted Rock. It could be a picture from Arches National Park. People have found these places. COVID did a lot of bad things, but it also put a whole lot of people that had never experienced the outdoors, that wanted to get the hell out of the city and go out and enjoy this country, and they found out this is okay. This is fun. So I want to kind of coast down to the finish line here and talk about something that is absolutely real. And I'm going to talk to you why. Because again, my only political position in this is I absolutely think it would be an irreversible tragedy if we lose these lands out of public ownership. And there are people who are working every single day, diligently, trying to figure out a way to get these lands out of federal common ownership. To give you an example, and I'm using Utah because that's where we are and that's where I live. But in 2012, they passed the Transfer of Public Lands Act, HB 148, which was signed by the governor. And what that said is you, by 2014, federal government, it's not binding on the federal government, but it certainly shows the intent of the people that push this forward. You will transfer all the BLM land, all the Forest Service non-wilderness land, all the Glen Canyon on the Utah side of the Colorado, all of the Grand Staircase Escalante, 31 million acres to the state of Utah by 2014. And it would become state-owned land, and the state could keep it or sell it. People say, well, we would keep it because we understand people like it. How realistic is that if it goes all of a sudden from 50 states paying to maintain these places to one state? What would those costs be? Using Utah as an example, and I'm using 2018 as the fiscal year, those costs have obviously gone up today. In 2018, the Bureau of Land Management in Utah spent for their operation and maintenance budget about $125.5 million. For the Forest Service, it was right at $70 million. For the National Park Service at Glen Canyon, right at $12 million. Now, the real ringer that's going to get nothing but worse, presumably as we go forward because of climate change, is fire. The fire season in 2018 on BLM cost right at $48 million. Forest Service fire cost in Utah was right at $36.5 million. Those are huge figures that are going to do nothing but increase. In addition, we talked previously about the fact that Utah received half the revenues that came in on public lands in Utah, so $74.5 million, and then they were paid in lieu of taxes, PILT, another $40 million. So if the state of Utah took this, they would have to come up with $406 million before they even started to make any money on these lands. That is a huge sum. In addition, in that same year, the state of Utah, on private lands and state land, just in fire costs, spent another $35 million, which would be really difficult, especially when you think that in the case of Utah, for example, the U.S. population of 335 million people as a tax base are paying for these lands, whether they're in Utah or Wyoming or wherever. If these go to the state of Utah, that tax base now goes from 335 million to 3.3 million people that are going to try to absorb these costs. That doesn't even make sense. They said, well, there's another section of the Statehood Act that says we're supposed to transfer it. That section says this, and I'm not a lawyer, you can read it yourself. 5% of the proceeds of the sales of public lands lying within said state, which shall be sold by the United States subsequent, after that land became a state, subsequent to the admission of said state into the Union, shall be paid to the state to be used as permanent fund, the interest of which only shall be expended for the support of the common schools within the state. The same wording is in Wyoming, Colorado, I think it's in Iowa that I've read, and probably many others. What it's saying is if we sell any more federal land in Utah, Utah, after the cost of sales, out of the net proceeds, will get 5%. Federal government gets the other 95%, but the lands then are gone, never to be gotten back. And as Frederick Law Olmsted said, if that happens, this is what's going to happen. Those who are rich enough reserve for themselves the choicest natural scenes. Unless government acts, all places favorable in scenery to the recreation of the mind and body will be closed against the mass of the people. And what that then looks like is a sign like this, not one that says, y'all come on in, welcome. It'll be, it's now private and you're not invited to come in there. So I'll just close by saying, I sure don't want to see that. And I think, you know, I'm an old guy. I'm going to get to weather it out, but I see a lot of faces in this room that are good and young and have a lot more years to go enjoy these lands. You have got to stay vigilant. You've got to understand there are people that are not stupid, they're very smart, and they're looking for a way to get these lands out of public hands. And when they say, no, there will be public hands, and they're going to the state lands, the state sells land to raise money. And there's no way they can foot that kind of bill. One fire season would wipe any western state out as far as trying to run these lands themselves. So with that, I thank you for giving me the chance to talk to you again. I appreciate what you do out there on the public lands. And after this, I'll be glad to try to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Hi there. Hi, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Walt. My gosh, what a great presentation. Um,
I can't
I,
start my video, Reba.
oh, I think we have you now.
There we go.
There we go. There we go. I know that everyone at home is going like this. Everyone is just applauding. That was so fabulous, Walt. Thank you so much. I might just ask, I'm going to mention a few things that really stuck out to me. And if others would like to put theirs in the chat, that would be wonderful, just so that we can hear what's resonating with people. For me, one of the things was the photo of the trees on the train, those big, big trees. And oh my gosh, that was just heartbreaking. The cartoon of Teddy Roosevelt and Gilbert Pinchot boxing, it's a very fun image. Some of those figures, the dollars and cents, not only the grazing cost, which was wild, but also $0 for watershed management. That's the value of that ecosystem service is just through the roof, and paying zero for it is crazy. And then the photos from Hawksbill in North Carolina and the Blue Ridge Parkway in Virginia. I've in the last year been on both of those places, so it's really it was cool to see them here. If anyone else would like to stick into the chat, anything that was of interest, anything that resonated for you that you'd like to share with all of us, please do. And I hope you can see there, Walt, some of those thank yous that are coming through. Everyone's really, really very thankful.
Reba, if I could.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw just some snippets of questions coming through, and I hope we can really get into some of those. I'm good to go as long as you want. But a couple of points that jumped out is there was a comment, and I think I got this right, that I have very deliberately try to stay as nonpartisan as possible. And this issue, among all the issues in this country going right now, is one of the most bipartisan issues I can think of. Mike Lee tried to sell 3 million acres recently in that bill that all of you know about. That wasn't defeated mostly by the Sierra Club or the Great Old Broads. It was defeated in large measure. They certainly helped. All of you helped. But the people that these folks listen to are hunters and fishermen and others, because it's a truly bipartisan issue. regardless of what you like to do on public lands, hunting, fishing, mountain biking, hiking, and so forth. You're from every political persuasion. And we need to lock arms with each other, quit picking at each other philosophically because we don't happen to like how somebody else uses their land. If they use it wrongly or illegally, we need to deal with that. But otherwise, a four-wheel drive user, you know, there's people hiking that don't like me as a mountain biker, and I'm a hiker too. And there's a lot of horse people that don't like mountain bikers, and there's a lot of hikers that don't like horse people. And a lot of people don't like the side by sides because they're noisy. Get over that. If the lands go away, we all have nothing. And so we need to lock arms because together we're a lot stronger politically than we are separately. So we can sort out philosophy later. We can put regulations and use guidelines and policies in place as they are appropriate. But we got to save the lands because these people are serious as a heart attack to get them away from us, and they have not gone away. So I intentionally keep people guessing as to who I am. I don't put a yard sign in my yard. I'm a registered unaffiliated, and that's absolutely intentional. As soon as I get pegged as you're a this or you're a that, uh, I just cut my audience in half. And my whole goal is not to pick political fights. There's plenty of people doing that. And if you look at my Facebook page, I'm not the least bit hesitant to say what I think about a particular issue. But that's not my purpose in these programs. It's to give people factual and historic information so that they, when they hear the crap that's being thrown at them that is simply not true, they know what is true and can deal with it from a truth basis. A lot of the things in there, the prices are higher now than they were. Grazing fees in Utah, just for example, are about nearly $12 an AUM for state rate, and it's still $1.35. The federal royalty on oil and gas moved up by Biden was now moved back down by Trump to 12.5%, which is idiotic. It's not even the same as a state. So I love to talk about all these things, but the reason I don't go into the politics is I just lose my audience or I lose too many of them that we need to fight this program, and we can win this fight, I guarantee you.
Yes. Yes, we can. Yes, we will. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thanks a bunch, Walt, for sharing that where you're coming from. And yeah, gosh, it is such a bipartisan issue. Um, Maybe we can go through just a few of the questions that were in the chat, and I don't mind. Well, I'm happy to kind of, there's been a few previously, so I'm happy to share, knowing that we have about half an hour, 40 minutes left. Or if you'd like to choose from the chat, whichever you'd prefer.
You guys pick the ones that you feel are the most important, and maybe I'll just close with some overview at the end of it. I I love this part of it.
That sounds great. And not the ones that are most important, but just I've kind of, there's some that are sort of similar. So I'll kind of combine the ones that are similar just so that everyone, as many people as possible, can have their questions answered. So the first question was from Sandra. Sandra's asking, where do U.S. senators like Senator Lee, I will not say his full brand, but Senator Lee, where do they get their argument that the federal government shouldn't own land? Where does that argument come from, and what's the best way to answer it?
Well, their argument has nothing to do with factual information, and most of them have very little affinity for the truth, to be honest with you. They have an agenda. There's nothing that they're saying in these lawsuits. I showed you what the Statehood Act of Utah actually says. It says they forever disclaim any future claim to any of the unappropriated lands in the state. Unless Congress changes its mind, Utah has no claim on any of those BLM or Forest Service lands that they're demanding that get transferred to them. So there's no basis in law. Even their legislative council in Texas is called Leg Council, that advises the legislature before they do a bill on whether they are on good, solid legal ground or not. The Utah Leg Council has in the past told them unequivocally, you're walking on really thin ice. There's nothing that substantiates what you're saying, that we were promised at statehood that we would get these lands back to us. And they never were ours. They were territorial lands that we were carved out of in the first place. So Mike Mike Lee said he is selling these lands for uh, affordable housing. Well, that is absolutely ludicrous. Those lands will go out to the highest bidder. It will not be an affordable housing group. There's plenty of billionaires in this country that could buy all 3 million acres and not even blink. And whatever happened on those acreages before, whether it was grazing or you going out with your grandfather and then your father and uncles and all setting up hunt camp 2 weeks before the season in your favorite place that's been generations in your family, that gets sold to private ownership, you're done. You're not going back in there. And if you think you're going to be grazing cows, not only not for $1.35, but not at all, because they don't need your grazing fees. It's going to be their own private land. Those Mike Lee knows who's going to buy those lands. I don't know that for a fact, but there's no other thing that makes sense to me, because it's not it's not going to be affordable housing. There's no water. There's no water in many of those places. How are you going to build housing out there, especially affordable housing? So uh, we just need to make sure that these senators and the congressional delegations know unequivocally, regardless of what your politics or your interests on public lands, you do not support getting rid of these lands, and just make it crystal clear to them that that's the case.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that, Walt. Um, we have a question from Mark, and this was just a line that was in your presentation. Well, just super quick, but I think it's a good larger point. Mark was saying that he's from New York and he's hiked within Bears Ears. I know that I live in Virginia, and about 17% of Virginia is protected land. About half of that is federal, and the rest is state and then private conservation easements. But there's this kind of impression that there's this, I don't know, like, I don't want to say tension, but that there's a sense that things are different in the West and the East, and that some people have a stake and others don't. Could you speak to how this is an issue for all of us, Walt?
I'll try to do that. First of all, we all own these lands wherever they are. If you're I just got back from North Dakota. I was in Idaho before that, 6 days in North Dakota doing talks. And in fact, if you haven't been, I know, but some of them were in conjunction with the opening of the Teddy Roosevelt Presidential Library in Medora, which is an absolute fabulous destination. If you ever get a chance to go up there, you'll learn a whole lot about Teddy. That pretty exciting. He had his challenges and things that maybe we could criticize, but he did a hell of a lot of great things, and conservation would be totally different. But in every one of those, I was in Idaho for 9 days doing talks in 4 different towns and a lot of university classrooms and so forth. 96% of people in bright red Idaho do not want their public lands to go away. And if you're in Idaho and Utah is trying to sell theirs, you own those lands in Utah just as much as a person in Utah does. You are a public landowner. So I think one of my great fears is there's too many people in the United States, especially young people, that don't know they even own these lands, They're not out there using them. They don't know that they could be doing the kinds of things that many of us that live out in the West, especially, and those that come from back eastern states that come out there to enjoy the national parks or come out for other activities on BLM and Forest Service land understand. A lot of them don't know they have them. They're not using them. That group I was talking to when they made that video were all guides and outfitters in southeast Utah. They make their living on those public lands, taking people on guided tours for mountain biking, river running, horseback rides, four-wheel drive adventures, and all those kind of things. They need to know they have them and could be using them, because if you don't know about something, if you don't use it and develop an appreciation and a love for it, there's no reason you're going to be particularly focused on protecting it. And that's part of the purpose of my doing this, is for people to understand these are theirs. And it's truly unique in the world that we have access to this kind of thing. I've talked to visitors for decades now that are coming from all over the world to see, first of all, the national parks, but then they come to a place like Moab, Utah, and they find out they can be out mountain biking on BLM or Forest Service lands, or hiking or climbing peaks or camping or mushroom collecting or whatever the hell they want to do. And it's okay. They don't come from a place where that's a possibility. So I just think we got to get the word out to folks and get people involved and get them out into this country that they own, and develop the next generation to be as focused on protecting them as I think this group that's listening today is.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's such a good point that we are all owners, backcountry hunters and anglers. Speaking of a good hunting and fishing group, they have those t-shirts that say public lands owner, which is such a great slogan. Yeah. Um, just looking at a couple of the other questions, Diana has a question, and I should mention that we are a 501c3, and so similar, well, nonpartisan. But could you talk a little bit about the fact that public lands issues are being adjudicated in the courts a lot now? Um, as they have been for a long time, but as there's so much dysfunction in decision making, a lot of these decisions are ending up eventually in the courts. So could you talk a little bit about what's maybe good about that? What are some things that are scary and shouldn't be about that? Could you just talk to us about doing lands management through litigation?
Well, I don't think we have any choice now to do it other than litigation, because that's the only thing that our being opposed to something is not going to stop it unless the courts stop it. That's the only way it's going to happen. And the idiocy that just happened with the Bears Ears and the Grand Staircase Escalante is just going to be tied up in court for the next number of years. I don't know what the answer to the Antiquities Act is, but to me it makes, and this is probably the thing that's on the burner right now that we've got to get figured out, and there's no way it's not going to be in the court to decide, is it makes no sense logically that the Antiquities Act was put in place that a president could establish a national monument, and a subsequent president can come in and eliminate it or downsize it. That makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, there's no way that would have been the intent of the Congress to do that. And so I don't know whether we'll ever do it or not, but a fix to the Antiquities Act would be something like one sentence. And there's a danger in opening up the Antiquities Act again. But if you inserted one sentence that said something along the lines of, any monument established by a president of the United States can only be reduced or eliminated by an act of Congress. And then there would be no interpretation. There's no way what just happened could have happened. And at some point in time, we may have to make that happen if the courts don't do it right. Because the intent clearly is a president establishes a national monument like Teddy did under both the National Monument and the Forest Reserve Act, that some other president can come through short of an act of Congress and deauthorize it or reduce it. Congress has eliminated a number of national parks. Mackinac Island, for example, is one of them. And so that mechanism is in place.
Someone mentioned Mackinac Island in the chat as well. Seems like that's very much on people's minds. And just wanted to make sure, a few times people have asked in the chat where to see this video. So americaspublicland.com, and the button says watch full video. You have to kind of scroll down the page and you'll see that. And Mackinac, I'm sorry. Okay, I wasn't reading too quickly.
I've got I think Rachel's got a QR code that'll take you to that website that has the program on it. Anything on that website, including this video, you're welcome to use, share, do whatever. It's not copyrighted. It's the whole purpose is to get it out there for people. This isn't a business of mine, and you're welcome to use it. If you're going to watch it on a big screen TV, because of visuals. Mark Finley, that did the production, did a really good job illustrating it, much better than I could do on a PowerPoint.
Thank you. Thanks, Walt. So just two more questions. One, Peggy and a few others were talking about the fact that we are transferring the wealth of public lands to private pockets, not just through a direct sell-off, but also through oil, gas, coal, ranching, timber, all that kind of stuff. It's a kind of a sell-off by another name. So could you talk about how that transfer of wealth is happening, all the recreation and watershed and carbon storage and all that good stuff that public lands does, all that beauty and cultural heritage, transferring that wealth to private pockets, not just through privatizing the land, but through privatizing what's in and within the land?
Absolutely. And I think this is a great question, and one that we really need to, when we get through this current period, we need to sit down and really figure out where we need to do. As I say in the presentation, as a public land manager, I could only do what Congress let me do on those public lands. I think we ought to go through all the multiple uses. Number one, I'm not against multiple use. That does not mean you do multiple use on every acre of land. You look at each piece of land and determine what makes the most sense there. And sometimes a national park makes the most sense, or a wildlife refuge, or whatever it is, makes the most sense. If oil and gas or mining makes sense in a given area, or putting a solar array in, or a wind farm in, whatever it is, as long as it is done right, as long as it is gone through the permitting process that evaluates whether this makes sense or not on that piece of land, and which was not the case historically in oil and gas and mining especially, the money is on the barrelhead to restore those lands after the permitting process is over with back to a good condition. Then that's fine. We need many of these kinds of things, and so we need to go back in, for example, in hard rock minerals. We need to come up with a royalty thing that puts that money back into managing these lands. It's free. We're giving it away now, and we have since 1872. That is absolutely ridiculous. And so in the case of grazing, there's no way that $1.35 an AUM in a state where on non-irrigated pasture land, it could be $25 to rent private ground, or as much as $15 or $20 to rent state ground to do the same kind of things. We ought to at least be consistent with whatever the state charges. All that money will come back into the federal coffers. Half of it will go to those states that will benefit directly from that. And so we need to go back through and reevaluate what it costs. I again think that outdoor recreation in America now, according to the Department of Commerce Bureau Economic Analysis, is a $1.2 trillion business. On public lands, it is a huge piece of the economic value of public lands, outstripping collectively grazing and in some cases mining and even oil and gas production. Outdoor recreation is a legitimate thing. Um, Utah, I'll give you an example. Colorado alone is a $17.2 billion industry, outdoor recreation in Colorado. A whole lot of that is on public land, and it's responsible for just under 133,000 jobs. That's a huge economic benefit. Well, those of us using public lands, we ought to have to buy an annual pass, and that money goes back into operating that. Then I got a pass, I can go out there and do the things I love to do. But there's going to be the staff on the public lands, even before this current mess is going on. The agencies did not have field staff out there. BLM didn't. I spend a lot of time on BLM and Forest Service, and you'll never see an employee or a ranger out there. I mean, when multi-million acres in the Utah area on BLM has one or two rangers, you're not going to see them, and they can't protect or help visitors out there on the land. So we've got to fix all that, and we need to charge to do that. I ought to have to pay something to hunt that goes back into managing those lands and so forth. So we got to do a major revision on running the public lands, at least in a sustainable business way, to do that. Fire is just huge, and we need to put some money back into that. I was in Idaho. I saw a letter from the governor of Idaho asking the legislature 2 years ago for $60 million to help the state cover fire costs for the state. And the governor said in the letter, the federal government has already spent $350 million in Idaho fighting fires. Think of Idaho taking that on. Idaho has 1 million people in it. How in the hell would they fund something like that? So we could do a whole lot of things. We can't fix it today, but man, that'd be a fun thing to work on, is trying to come up with a way to run these lands in a way that makes them better, gives a better return to the taxpayer in supporting the operation of those lands. But we need to work together to do it.
Yeah. And that's a great segue, Walt, to our next to last question. So Don is saying, and I suspect Don may be a public lands manager, not sure. If Don, if you'd like to share anything, please feel free. Many of the folks here are either current or former public lands employees. But Don is saying that managers are challenged with overcrowding, as you just mentioned. And separate from the funding issue, he's asking how we can balance resource protection, high quality visitor experiences with the mandate to keep lands accessible to all. How do you balance those two things?
That's a great question, and it sounds like it's coming from a land manager, because that's what I wrestled with forever. It's not just, a lot of people think we need to limit numbers because it impacts negatively the natural and cultural resources. It's also, as he points out, it can ruin the experience too. You don't go to a lot of these places to be shoulder to shoulder with a mob. This administration has rolled back the efforts like in Arches for timed entry, in Zion for timed entry, Yosemite for reservations to get in there, and it's an absolute chaotic mess now. You look across when I was chief ranger in DC, I had people come in my office, ask if they could come up and talk to me. They were pissed. They'd been in DC for several days. They'd waited 2 mornings in line to get in the White House to get tickets to go on a White House tour, only to be almost there, and a ranger comes walking down the line saying, "Folks, sorry, all the tours are booked for today. Come back tomorrow." And they said, "We're glad to do that. Why don't you let us go out and visit other things and get a reservation so that we're not standing in line just wasting our time? We understand not everybody will fit." That's true with Yosemite. It's true with a lot of other places, Zion Canyon, Arches. We can't all fit at the same time. There's no physical way to park, and the experience is ruined. So we're going to have to seriously look at things that make sense on a case by case basis, and a reservation system, which happens all over the world for prime destinations, is going to be the future. There's too many people wanting to go see these places, and we can't all do it at once. So we need to come back in and really do studies on a case by case, location by location basis, um, that sets up a system that works, and you get to go when your time is there and have a great experience, and you just have to plan it a little ahead of time. And in the interim, you're in the area doing other things which you wanted to do anyway. But this lets you plan your visit, and it's not unreasonable, and it's not some communist plot to keep people from going to the parks, contrary to their feeling. You know, if you think about it, these parks are an absolute godsend to rural America. Moab, Utah, for example, has 9,700 population, Grand County, including Moab. You know how many people come there a year to visit Moab, Utah? 3 million. 3 million. And they're not coming to see Aunt Mildred. They're coming to because Arches is there and Canyonlands is there. And then they find out about the LaSalle's and the BLM land, and they come back. And they're dumping millions and millions of dollars in rural Utah. We need to keep that experience something that through social media they're saying, hey, it's a great experience. Because what they're going to start saying now with the free for all that's happening trying to get into Arches and not being able to find a parking place is not going to be good for promoting these places at all.
Yeah, yeah, that's the voice of experience there, and thanks as well to the land agency folks, current and retired, who are here with us today. Really grateful for that. Um, and yeah, I was just reading a study yesterday that people who live in rural counties, comparing people who live in rural counties with federal public land versus rural counties without federal public land. And the people in the counties with the federal public land made an average of $2,000 per person more per year. So yeah, it's definitely it's dollars and cents that is coming into people's pockets. So thank you for sharing that. Maybe just the last question. There were several of those, and then after Walt answers, then we'll say thank you to our partners and give you some information about what's coming up next. But this question, a lot of questions that were kind of centering around this, from Connie, Rose, Andrea, Peggy, Susan, maybe others that I missed in the chat there. Thank you all for asking this question. The question is, there are a couple of parts to it. How do we mold the millions of people who use public lands into a cohesive political force? Do we need deep pockets? How can we, especially fierce older women, how can we best push back against the threats that we're facing right now? What do you think is the most effective course of action?
Well, I think Reba kind of mentioned it before. I was in Wyoming. The Wyoming Outdoor Council brought me up there a year and a half ago or so. First day, we met with a bunch of organizations, Powder River Coalition, the Arapaho and Shoshone tribes, Nature Conservancy, Wilderness, Sierra Club, a bunch of them like that. And at the end of the day, one of them said, you have any parting words? And I said, man, you should never ask me that. Yes, I do. Look around this room. We're all conservation minded people. you need to do what I mentioned before when I said you need to be getting with four-wheel drive clubs, with hunters and fishermen, with horse users and others that you normally might not feel you have as much in common with, and come up with some way to work together on protecting these lands. Working together, you might even figure something out like helping the four-wheel drive community work with industry to make those machines a hell of a lot quieter than they are now. I don't know what the possibilities are, but collectively, we have a lot more political power than we do individually. And so I don't know how to tell you, Reba, how to reach out to other organizations, but you got to do it. And we need to fight stuff, but the in your face approach, while it's important in some cases, there's also an approach of coming forward positively and figuring ways to work collaboratively with other organizations to come up with, in some cases, compromise positions that we all actually win from. I am absolutely positive that if I sat down for a couple of days in a group of diverse people, we'd find a hell of a lot of things that we mostly agreed on, and then we could focus on working through some of those other things. But bottom line in this case is the public lands are what we would agree on for sure, and let's work from there. So I think it's incumbent on these organizations to reach out to one another and figure out how to come together with a summit meeting or something, gathering to figure out where we're on the same page and how we can collaboratively work to make sure these people who are well funded, they're focused, they're ruthless, and they're going to try every way to spin the legal system to try to get what they want, which is to get these lands away from us, and it will not include us in the future. And so I don't know how you go about doing that, but that's something I can't put together. It's something that those of you that are in leadership in these different organizations need to be really figuring out how to do together. And I think that's an exciting prospect, actually, because that would be a tough force politically for them to ignore.
Well, thank you, Walt. And I am going to ask, I think, the question that many of us are wondering, which is, what can we do? What can we do? What would you recommend that we do?
Well, a couple of things. One is the most effective thing you can do with your congressional delegation is to call them. They log every call. They'll log your name and your zip code at least. They'll log what your issue is and what your perspective is on that issue. If you can't do that, then certainly an email or a letter is good. But the best thing is they're going to log your calls, and they're going to tell the boss after a while, hey, we're getting a lot of feedback on this. We better have a look at what this is all about. The other is in reaching young people, which is a challenge at times. Somebody set me up the other day with, is it okay to share this, Reba? With something that young people said that young people have really thought was worth doing. And hey, all, this is Ranger Walt. I'm out on our public lands. Behind me are the Collegiate Peaks in the San Isabel National Forest. You and I own that, and this land I'm standing on, which is administered by BLM. There's folks trying every day to get them away from us. I really would encourage you to do a little video like I'm doing here with you today. Introduce yourself, maybe say where you grew up, and talk about why these lands are important to you. Share that with your friends and let them know there's people trying to get them away from us, and they are focused on doing it, and that you guys need to defend them. This is your future. I'm an old guy. It's not my future, but it sure is yours, and it would be an irreversible tragedy to lose them. Call your congressmen and senators. Tell them no way. And Other than that, get out and have fun on your land. See you next time. So did that come through? That I have somebody set me up an Instagram channel that is called the Ranger Walt. I didn't have the expertise to do that, but I've got a bunch of video shorts on that from a Green River trip that we took. For example, I just spent 21 days rowing the Grand Canyon, which I think I'm not going to do again for another 40 years. At 80, that was a little challenge in loading and unloading those damn boats 42 times. But anyway, did a bunch more videos, and people like doing those and they like sharing them. And that's just another way to let people know these lands are theirs. They could be out doing the same kinds of things. Here's another one that's not me. That is another example of what I'm talking about.
Hi, I'm Robin. I grew up in Moab, Utah, lived in Texas. Now I live in Munich, Germany, and I am back in the US visiting family here in Colorado, out riding my mountain bike on my public lands here in Colorado. It's been great living in Germany. I think that's also afforded me the opportunity to learn how important this resource we have in the US is. And when people ask me, what do you miss most about the US and living there? I say the wilderness. And what I mean by that is these public lands, this BLM land, the Forest Service land, the national parks. I miss being out where I can go ride my bike, be by myself. In a lot of cases, you don't pay a fee and you just have these amazing, incredible spaces that are nowhere else in the world. And so I'm here enjoying them. I hope you also enjoy your public lands.
So that's just a couple of examples of the kinds of things you can be doing out there. And it's also fun. Out of 16 people on that river trip, I think I've got 14 little short videos of folks that wanted to share why this kind of thing is important to them and why they don't want to lose it. And it's fun. And those of you that are out there doing fun things, all kinds of different things, I'd really encourage you to do that kind of thing and share them around. And if you get a chance, copy the Ranger Walt on your post. I'd love to see those.
Thank you, Walt. Thank you. My gosh, those were such fun little videos. Thank you for sharing them. And gosh, it's such a great thing that people could do. So as we wrap up for today, if you haven't seen it yet in the chat, there are a couple of links that might be helpful. Walt's website and Instagram account are both there. To see the presentation from today, scroll down on that homepage. There's a section that says watch full video here. So that's the one you're looking for. It says full video. Would really love to thank our co-host for today, the organizations that are help bringing this event to life. The Association of National Park Rangers and the Coalition to Protect America's National Parks. Both of those links are in the chat there on the side. So please feel free to give them a visit. They're doing really fabulous work and helped bring this event together today. Finally, the website for Great Old Broads for Wilderness is there. If you haven't yet, please take a look. And Grand Staircase Escalante and Bears Ears were mentioned today. There's a little bit of information about how you can protect them in that blog post there. Thank you so much to Walt for being with us, Ranger Walt, for not only putting this presentation together and sharing all of his expertise so freely, but for sharing his time. Thank you, Walt, for being with us here today. It's really, really wonderful. And thank you to everyone who's watching. There are so many things that you could have done with these 2 hours. And the fact that you've chosen to spend this time in front of your computer, of course, learning a lot and laughing and having a good time and kind of having your mind blown a little bit. That's just a real sign of where your heart is. So thank you for your commitment. There is a lot of work to do, and we will get there only if we do it together. So thank you for being part of this movement. Thank you for putting your hands to the wheel that way. It really makes a difference. In the days ahead, we will be sending an email with a recording of this video some of those links that are in the chat there, and then ways that you can take action. So please be on the lookout for that. Walt, are there any words that you would like to close us with?
Not other than this is all of ours to do. This is not the time to sit back in despair, whether it's on public lands or anything else, in my opinion. Step up and figure out some way to make a difference. The future is ours, and we can make it better. And we're going to keep these public lands. I mean, it's something absolutely worth fighting for. And if I can ever help you, I've been all over the country now. I've been about 15 states. I don't charge a speaker's fee, but they're flying me back to North Dakota again here in September to do another session up there, and I'm heading to Oklahoma and probably over into Durango area here pretty soon in October. And if I can help you, let me know and we'll work something out, make it happen. But get involved, stay steady, and get out and use your lands. Make a little video and share it with your friends. And again, everything I have there is yours to use and share. And if you have any suggestions, send me a note.
Thank you, Walt. And how should people get in touch with you? Visit your website?
If you want, I'm just at waltdabney@gmail.com. Pretty straightforward. All one word, waltdabney@gmail.com. If you want to send me a note, I'd be glad to answer you. And band together. We're stronger together than we are separately. That's just a fact.
Yeah, I
And
can
thanks for
imagine.
taking your time. I really enjoyed talking to you today. And thanks to Great O'Broads for sponsoring this.
Yeah, thanks. Oh my gosh, Walt, thanks so much for being here. And thank you to Susan, who's already going to start with hiking and watching this presentation and figuring out what she can do. Thank you to Susan, and thank you to all the Susans who are going to do something after this event. Thank you all for being here. I hope you have a good rest of your morning or your afternoon. And until next month, bye.
Right, Reba?